Norita is an indispensable figure in our political arena. She doesn't allow for a movement to be stagnant.
I'm Ansh Dubey for Feature First, and I'm here with Jayson for his new documentary, Norita. I couldn't have asked for a better introduction to Norita's story. Your respect and admiration for her is so deeply embedded into the film, and I love the documentary, and I wanted to thank you for this interview opportunity.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name's Jayson. This is my second feature documentary. It profiles the life and activism of one of the founding mothers of Argentina's Mothers of Plaza de Mayo resistance movement, and Norita and other mothers during the dictatorship left their homes as quote unquote housewives to search for their children and face up to the military regime that had taken them. And we profiled Nora during 2018 when she was involved in a lot of causes related to civil rights and human rights, and in particular, fighting for abortion reform in Argentina. She was held up as like a figurehead of the women's movement for the 2 years that it took to legalize abortion in Argentina. So yeah, it's a film that goes back and forth in time and looks at a woman who is both, historically and contemporarily very relevant in Latin American politics. And yeah, and this is my second film, which I co-directed and co-produced, co-directed with Andrea Tortonese, who also provided the animations for the film. And yeah, my second film situated in Argentina's dictatorship.
Very nice. So my first question, Norita is the story of these women who weren't initially tied to human rights movements, and your own journey began as a newspaper journalist, and you're now transitioning to film and documentary. Do you think that your transformation was a conscious decision into, the political sphere and social movements, or was it more like a gradual shift that you didn't realize till you were there?
Yeah, I think I've always been very interested in ordinary people and their involvement in politics. I come from a working class rural background. So, when you grow up in a small town, you tend to know people, you understand the intricacies of social bonds and how things are done. And yeah, I lived in Argentina for several years working as a newspaper reporter, and I was able to meet a lot of, really interesting people, especially in the human rights movement there, which is because of the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo and the things that they've achieved in Argentina. Argentina has a very big reputation, a strong reputation outside of the country for being sort of pioneers in the field of human rights. It was the first country to ever use its own penal code to try and jail perpetrators of human rights crimes. So yeah, I feel like it was very much, moving from journalism to film, and also from just, reporting the daily news into really deep, complex themes about, what it means to be a human. Basically, I guess it's, the human condition. For me, it's sort of just been a natural progression and very much based on the types of personal relationships that I've built along the way.
Es una fiera, una leona.
Es un compromiso interior que no lo puedo dejar.
And what was that like, your transition, how the two mediums kind of allowed you to tell stories differently?
I think that journalism is, what journalism helps you do as a filmmaker is you are able to understand structures and systems of power in a way that can be very useful if you're trying to say something, send a strong message in through cinema. I think cinema is innately more powerful because there's more of a space for emotion, it's actually, you know, when you start musicalizing things, for example, you're immediately asking the viewer to feel, as opposed to just take in the information and inform themselves of something. So yeah, I mean, it's tricky. You have to strike the right balance, I think. But yeah, the way I approach stories initially is always, yeah, I guess from a journalistic perspective, you know, is this in the public interest? Is this a universal story? Does it say something about the structures and systems of power of our societies? And yeah, and then from there, I kind of switch more into filmmaker mode and start feeling things. And that's very much about, you know, the relationships that you build with the people around you, the people that you're profiling. For example, in Norita, I always felt very moved by Nora as a person and obviously by her story. So a lot of decisions were made about, made kind of, you know, how can I pay homage to this woman who is just incredible? You know, it's a very emotional experience.
Mhm.
Tildaban como comunistas o madres de comunistas, pero la mayoría éramos amas de casa. Las madres recorremos el mundo contando la historia de nuestros hijos. Nos dimos cuenta, las madres, después de 46 años, que fuimos un grupo de feministas de primer agua.
So, Norita addresses the military dictatorship and broader human rights issues. Are you also trying to make a statement about, you know, the growing rise of fascism globally? And how do you view these issues in relation to like the political situation, particularly in Argentina with Javier Milei? So I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the film is the film is a like a historical document, I would call it. You know, it kind of we spent the last years of Nora's life filming her. And I think and she died recently at the start of this year. With her passing, I think there's you know, it's an end of an era in terms of the kind of activism that made Argentina renowned in the human rights sphere. So the film was an opportunity to document that for one last time with first person accounts and, you know, the lived experience of the victims of the dictatorship. And I think in that sense, that decision to document Nora's life innately is an attempt by us, the filmmakers, to you know, preserve or help preserve a legacy. And that's very much related to what's happening in the world today. You know, there was an urgency in doing the film because throughout the 6 or 7 years that it took us to do it, you know, we saw so many things that we'd grown accustomed to start to crumble, you know, like this sense of security that our democratic systems were there to protect us, and they were you know, solid, and that our institutions would, you know, would serve as a barrier to some of these, you know, hyper personal styles of leadership, which are increasingly showing themselves to be quite authoritarian, very divisive, accusatory, inflammatory. You know, all of that is very much related to the history of the dictatorship in Argentina. And I think telling the story as it was and documenting Nora's story for its value, its legacy, is an important way of telling audiences this is what can happen. You know, this is where we're headed.
So what do you think is the role of these narrative features and documentaries right now, considering the political climate? And do you think that there's a reason that so many are coming right now? We had Argentina 1985 a couple years ago, and there was a documentary from last year, The Trial, and and I mean Norita was filmed, you know, several years ago, and throughout the course of several years, and so. But what is its release right now meant to coincide with any global issues or what's going on in Argentina?
The release of the film is more the product of just the time that it took us to finish it. I think it's interesting that some of these features and documentaries about Argentina or about dictatorships in Latin America, I think it's interesting that some of them have come out in the last few years because it's actually become a lot harder to do political films. I was reading the other day, some of the streamers, they made a lot of money off some really quality political films, but now there's kind of a resistance and a hesitance to upset or to engage in political debate, and so they're shying away from financing and supporting political films. So the fact that some of them have come out recently, I think, is a huge achievement and a testament to the storytelling of some of these amazing films like Argentina 1985. And I've always worried that the film would come out at a time and, maybe things in society and the culture have moved on. But, it just seems like as more time passes and the more we wade into this kind of breakdown of our society, our democracies, the film becomes more and more relevant. So I hope that it has a long life and that it's interpreted and used in ways that are relevant for local communities. Because I also think there's that aspect of it as well. It shows how, ordinary people can organize in a collective for a greater good. It's about, collective action as opposed to singular, heroic behavior. Even though Nora is a heroine, she does it with other people. And so I think it's a tool, it can be a tool for grassroots activists and for communities wanting to find ways through these problems.
And you mentioned that it's harder for to make political cinema like this, and I cited in my review that the current government tries to. There's been reports that they've tried to downplay the horrors of the dictatorship. So did you face any issues while trying to make Norita or screen it um, anywhere, but specifically in Argentina? If you has it had its premiere there, and did you face any issues?
Yeah, so the film has screened at 3 festivals in Argentina, and then it will have its theatrical release from November the 7th. And Argentina is a unique country. Like it has a very heated political climate, but it's not, ironically, despite having a really brutal military dictatorship, it doesn't have a culture of political violence. And, very rare are the cases of people being threatened and things like that. And so I don't expect that anything negative will happen in Argentina, but I will say that I do think the current government is, it's the use of the dictatorship and the denying of the crimes of the military in the 70s is very much a smoke and mirrors tactic to provoke people and upset people and distract them from some of the things that are happening in Argentina at the moment in terms of like austerity and a really hostile political climate in the Congress. So I don't think the Malay government actually believes in what it says about the dictatorship or that they really care. It's just used as a party political tool. And for that reason, again, I don't suspect anything's going to go wrong.
Hmm. So you've had a pretty long-standing relationship with Norita and with Argentina and the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. So how has making the film impacted you personally? And what was the experience of just making it?
Yeah, I think when you come into contact with people who have gone through horrific experiences, like in Nora's case, losing her son and never finding his body, she died not knowing whatever happened to him. I think that you take on a responsibility that, transcends the individual relationships that you build with people. Like you have to become kind of committed to the cause and on a personal level, that feels like an existential change. It's not a matter of like posting things on social media or like getting a tattoo, it's of Nora's headscarf or her face or whatever. It's actually something that I know that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. It's that intolerance for injustice. It's that, needing to listen to people who are really having a bad time. So yeah, for me on a personal level, it's been very important. And at the same time, I've often described it as when you come into contact with these stories and these people, initially it was like the loss of innocence, the loss of my innocence, like I felt like I was living in this really happy world. And then all of a sudden you hear stories about people being taken and babies being stolen and given to military families, or, the prisoners being thrown out of airplanes into the ocean to get rid of their bodies. Like, you can't turn away from that. You can't live your life the same way when you come into contact with those things.
So you've, as you said, you've kind of become more aware of these things. Do you, and and Norita is a historical film, but have you seen parallels between the history of Argentina and current global struggles?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I think that the resurgence of war, the situation in Gaza, the situation in Ukraine, that I think maybe something that defines the experience of people roughly of my generation is that we who are from sort of Western countries like the US or Australia, so we grew up with this idea that the world was getting better, that we were progressing, that like these fantastic ideas that we had to open up the global economy and let trade flourish, apparently on equal terms, has really not come to fruition. And in fact, it's failed in many ways. And the consequence of that has been a return to this sort of what seems to be like a primal instinct to do damage to other people. And I think that's there's a huge parallel with what happened in Argentina, with what's happening in the world. It's like a loss of humanity. We don't see each other as equals. We see each other as enemies again. And I think, yeah, who knows how bad it can get. But I think Argentina's experience shows that absolutely can get very bad very quickly, even in societies that are sort of quote unquote civilized. It can, things can go wrong, and I think we should all be on alert at the moment for sure.
In Argentina, the military was trained to intervene in political life, but then this coup was different.
Tengo uno de mis hijos desaparecido desde el 15 de abril de 1977.
Tienen que devolver a los desaparecidos con vida porque así se los llevaron.
Era el intercambio ese, sí. Me llevaron mi hija, me llevaron mi hijo.
El pueblo dice que es mentira que existen desaparecidos y que el gobierno lógicamente niega.
Yo no estaba preparada para esto. Ninguna madre decía no salga a la calle, que le puede pasar lo mismo que le pasó al hijo. Parecía que me hundía en un abismo.
So have there been any documentaries or narrative films that particularly influenced your career and Norita?
Yeah, there are a couple of films in Argentina that were produced 10 years ago that really showcase the like the nature of life in the 1970s, which was very unusual. One of them is called El futuro es nuestro, which is the future is ours. And I'll just find it's some fantastic filmmakers in Argentina that have done a lot of work on these themes. I don't know if Ernesto Ardito and Virna Molina. But in a, like a more commercial sense, I guess the films that helped me understand that in order to tell the broader story of Argentina, the broader story of the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, we had to focus in on just one person. There's so many examples like RBG, I've always thought was like a great example of what Norita could be, you know, and we kind of work towards celebrating that really quirky but powerful, quirky and tiny and very loving woman who does really extraordinarily mighty things. And yeah, and any sort of hard-hitting political content. I really, really like the film The Edge of Democracy. I think it's one of the most interesting documentaries that's come out in recent years about the coup, the political coup against Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff. And yeah, so bits and pieces, you know, I think you can't be overly influenced by other films or the suggestions or advice that people give you about how to tell a story. I really think that as directors, we need to let our feelings, you know, and our emotions guide us when we're telling stories. I think we can really get caught up in these formulas that are becoming more and more prominent as a result of the way that the streamers produce and also buy certain content. And I think that's a trap for directors making cinema. You really should not get caught up in formulas and just try and stay true to your emotional self as much as possible.
It's a great response. Both of your documentaries have dealt with the military dictatorship in Argentina, and that's clearly a subject that's very close to your heart. But you're clearly currently in the early phases of two new documentaries about the United States and Australia. Could you share any details about any of them?
Yeah, so I'm working on two projects of two totally different scales. One is like a much bigger project, which is maybe like has more commercial ambitions than the smaller one. So yeah, I mean, both are about people, real people facing up to big injustices. I think that's probably the theme that carries through my work and will potentially always be present. Specifically, the film that I'm doing, the smaller one that I'm doing is about my hometown in Australia. And it's a, you know, really broad look, but involves, you know, real people on the ground sort of coming to terms with the history of the town and looking at, you know, colonization and some of the harder things happening in smaller towns, you know, like illicit drug use and suicide among young men. Yeah, like a postcard and a snapshot of what rural Australia is in 2024. So yeah, I'm experimenting with some new styles and new ways of working, and yeah, and really confident on the back of finishing a second film about what my voice is and how I want to tell stories and why. I think the process of finishing Norita over so many years, you're constantly having to assess, you know, why am I doing this? Documentaries take so long to make. They're really expensive. And you're constantly asking yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? What's next? Can I make this sustainable as a career? And I think in that process of asking yourself questions, you come to know yourself quite well and start to understand these things, you know, your voice, your style, your political position, your you know, your philosophy as a human, those sorts of things.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and congratulations on making Narita and the upcoming release and premieres. It was so great to speak to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.